What's up YouTube, Seth here with a Battlefield 3 Armored Kill gameplay commentary video. Yes, Armored Kill came out earlier this week for premium members on PlayStation 3, and since then I have played quite a bit of it indeed, so I wanted to make a video discussing what I think about it, some of the things that I think DICE did really well, some of the things that I think might have gone a little bit better, and also the massive patch that was released along with Armored Kill, because that has implemented quite a few significant changes that everyone should probably be aware about. The footage in the background is not one continuous game, but it's actually footage compiled from 4 different games, one from each of the maps on Armored Kill, because I wanted to showcase each of the different maps and let you guys get a feel for how each of the maps plays and how each of the maps is a bit different from the others. So, anyway, I guess we'll start with some of the things that I really like about Armored Kill. The maps themselves are absolutely stunning. They're beautiful, they're well designed, and each map feels well enough different from each other map so that it keeps things interesting, even if a couple of them seem sort of just wide open and flat terrain, not much interesting stuff going on. The map that I'm playing currently is called Albor's Mountain, which is my personal favorite, because mostly of the elevation changes and the varied terrain. There's also Vanguard Desert, a wide open desert map heralded as the largest map in Battlefield history, which you've probably seen from Armored Kill trailers. There's also Armored Shield, which reminds me a lot of Heavy Metal, if anybody's played Bad Company 2 and remembers that map. As well as Death Valley, the first nighttime map in Battlefield 3 that actually allows you to see the sky to some degree, unlike Tehran Highway, and it's pretty interesting to see the sky and everything like that, simply because it is beautifully rendered and clouds move across the sky. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it really is pretty interesting to be in a game with that happening, especially when flying a jet or something like that. That's another thing about the expansions that I really like. The air combat is very dynamic. It's a lot more interesting than air combat in regular modes, at least I think. Maybe because there are more air vehicles all over the place a lot of the time, but also because just of the wide open nature of the maps, there's less stuff to crash into, there's less stuff that you have to avoid, and it gives you more of an opportunity to create a massive, engaging dogfight. Now, some other things that I like about Armored Kill: the vehicles, all the added vehicles are a ton of fun. Buggies, or quad bikes, whichever you prefer, which many will fondly remember from Bad Company 2, are making a return in Armored Kill, and they are just as fun, if not more fun, than they were in Bad Company 2. In Armored Kill, you can drive them off cliffs, you can launch them off ramps, you can Jihad C4 buggy if you like, you can do all sorts of fun stuff with them, and of course they have horns, so that's a fun little feature, but quad bikes are definitely one of my favorite new vehicles in the expansion. Another new vehicle that you'll see on screen right now, actually, is the artillery truck, and that's the thing that I'm currently shoving down the mountain. These are not very useful, they're very slow, they're clunky, and they don't have any boost feature or any way to defend themselves other than running people over when you're driving them. And the gunner seat, which launches the missiles, is very hard to use because the missiles tend to fly off at sort of odd and unpredictable trajectories, and you can't really see over any mountains or obstacles that you're going to be arcing the missiles over, so it can be very, very difficult to actually aim with them and to be effective with them. Nevertheless, there's still a fun new feature in Armored Kill that you should definitely try out if you ever have the chance to jump in an artillery truck. Now here, another thing that you'll see on the screen is the AC-130 gunship that I just shot down here, and these are implemented in a very interesting way that varies depending on what mode you're playing. Here in Conquest, I think that they're very well balanced. They're a great addition to the game because even though they are heavily armed and armored, they have essentially a tank cannon, a helicopter gunner's turret, and 2 anti-air cannons, which either of the gunners can switch to at any time to defend themselves. They also are very slow. They are piloted by the AI rather than an actual player, so they fly on a set path, and you can't alter that path, which means it makes it very predictable where they're going to fly and where you have to shoot to take them down. And I think the balance of being very, very vulnerable, but being very heavily armed and armored at the same time creates for some interesting gameplay scenarios and balances it out fairly nicely. Now, they're not as well implemented on Rush, and that's something that I really don't like about Armored Kill, but I'll get there when I get to the things that I don't like about Armored Kill. One of the last things that I do like about Armored Kill, however, is the fact that the flight ceiling has apparently been increased well over what it is in vanilla Battlefield 3. And while I haven't confirmed this or measured it in any way, I have had fewer problems with crashing into the flight ceiling and having my plane stall out, or dogfights ending with one of the participants just slamming into the flight ceiling and getting stuck there. So that goes along with what I was saying earlier about air combat in general just being more fun in Armored Kill than it is in vanilla Battlefield. So, what are some of the things that I don't like as much about Armored Kill? Well, unfortunately, there are quite a few. For starters, Rush mode as a whole is pretty broken. The main reason is that the attackers have a huge advantage over the defenders in every map and base that I played on. In every single Rush game of Armored Kill that I've played so far, the attackers have won every time. And I credit that mostly to the fact that while they get a gunship, the Thunderbolt, several tank destroyers, and buggies with every base, the defenders only get 1 or 2 tank destroyers at most, and the Frogfoot to defend with. The most major problem is that gunship, because essentially it circles your MCOMs, and anybody gunning for the gunship can just look at the MCOMs and bomb them, without barely having to aim. And this can cause many, many problems for defenders who don't have a competent Frogfoot pilot, because the gunship is so heavily armored and you don't have many jets or other air vehicles to take it down with when you're defending. The problem that the other problem that I see with the Rush in general is just how exposed the maps can be at sometimes. And this can be a problem when there are lots of vehicles and opportunities for attacking snipers to pick off defenders, because the defenders, I feel like, are very rarely given a chance to even get to the MCOMs that they need to defend. In addition to this, something that I forgot to mention about the AC-130 gunship is that it acts as a permanent spawn point, much like the Amtrak acts as a permanent spawn point for the attackers on the ground. And anyone who wants to spawn on the gunship can then paradrop essentially right over the MCOMs of the defenders in many scenarios. And I found when I was defending that many enemies would just end up right behind our base without us being able to do anything about them, because they would paradrop out of nowhere, since you don't actually always drop right beneath where the gunship is, and there was very little we could do about that. So we essentially got sandwiched between the guys parachuting at the back of our base and the gunship pounding us from all angles, as well as the regular attackers advancing on foot and in the ground vehicles from the front. So I do not enjoy Rush on Armored Kill. I do not recommend trying it unless you have many, many friends to communicate with, because it's very, very hard for the defenders to do anything significant on Rush mode. Other major concerns that I have with Armored Kill, which I think that many people have probably shared ever since we heard of Armored Kill being released, really, is that the maps are not sized down very much for consoles. This is a good thing as well as a bad thing, but it mostly results in gigantic spans of time where there's absolutely nothing to do. The distance between 2 flags is very often the distance between maybe the Alpha flag and the Delta flag on a regular map. And it can be very, very frustrating to have absolutely nothing to do for long periods of time where you're just walking across open space and not encountering any other players. Bases do not always spawn all the vehicles that players might need to get across the maps, and of course there's only 24 players total on console anyway. And if there were more players, then obviously it wouldn't be as much of a problem. But with the maps not being scaled down very much and the player count remaining low, it does create the problem, as I said, that many of us expected, of many of the maps feeling like a ghost town a lot of the time. And that's not what you want to be feeling when you have the opportunity to have massive tank battles, massive dogfights, and all that sort of thing that was advertised in the trailers. It's still enjoyable sometimes to just walk around. As I said, the maps are very, very pretty, they're well designed and all that, but it can be a real pain to just be wandering around having nothing to do for long stretches of time. Anyway, those are my major opinions on the Armored Kill expansion, so now I'd like to talk a little bit about the patch that came with it. Again, I think I'll start with some of the things that I like about the patch, and then discuss some of the things that I don't really like about the patch. So, probably my #1 favorite change that they made in the patch is the fact that all LMGs got, or rather all belt-fed LMGs, such as the PKP or the M249 SAW, got a accuracy bonus when standing and aiming down sights. And the PKP, which has been my #1 kills weapon since essentially the game came out, is even more powerful now than it ever has been, and I'm really, really enjoying the changes that they made to those LMGs. Also, they made a significant change to a couple of the personal defense weapons, most notably the UMP45 and the M5K. The M5K got its maximum damage increased from 20 to 25, so now it can kill you in 4 hits or 2 headshots, rather than 5 hits or 3 headshots when it deals its maximum damage. Also, the UMP45 got its maximum damage range raised from 25 to 34, which allows it to now kill you in 3 body shots or 2 headshots rather than taking 4 body shots or 2 headshots and maximum damage before. Both of these changes have made these weapons a lot more effective and fun to use. I sort of wrote off the M5K as being inferior to both the P90 and the MP7 before the patch, and now I think the M5K is probably my favorite personal defense weapon in the game. The fact that it has very low recoil, great hip fire accuracy, and a 900 rounds per minute fire rate, coupled with the fact that it now does 25 damage, makes it an incredibly good weapon. Also, the UMP45, it is better, but I was never really a fan of it, so I haven't experienced much of an improvement with that, but I'm sure a lot of people will like the changes that they made to the UMP45, and I have seen a lot of other players using it a lot more than they had before the patch. Some other weapon changes that I'm enjoying: the notorious 9.3R burst pistol has had its damage and its range both nerfed, however it has had its recoil buffed. But overall, it has made that pistol a lot less effective at all ranges. It's much more of a close-quarters situational gun now, rather than a jack-of-all-trades, best-in-almost-every-scenario pistol. So I'm seeing that used a lot less, and I think that it was a change that had to be done, even though it wasn't necessarily overpowered. It was sort of like the M16, where it wasn't really worse than any other pistol at anything specific, unless you count the Magnum or the Rex, which obviously do a lot more damage than the 9.3R. Still, the 9.3R was a very good gun that was used by a lot of people, and needed to be balanced out in the way that I think DICE balanced it out, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I mentioned the M16 there, and that's another weapon that they made some significant changes to. It's had its recoil nerfed in basically every way. Now, I admittedly was an M16 user, and I've noticed that, yes, it is a bit more difficult to control, but it hasn't really changed the effectiveness too much if you know how to use it. Still, it's made it less of a go-to weapon, it's made it more interesting to use, and I think that it was a nice change to be made because now not everybody is running around just spamming the M16 all the time. At the same time, the M416, which was sort of a middle of the range, not too good, not too bad assault rifle, at least in my opinion beforehand, has gotten its recoil buffed in almost every way. And while this has made it, at least in my opinion, again, less fun to use maybe, because it's kind of like a laser beam now, it still doesn't feel really overpowered to me, because it doesn't have an incredibly high fire rate, it doesn't do any more damage than any of the other assault rifles, so I'm pretty happy with the changes they made there. Some other quick little things that they changed that I'm happy with: the AEK has reduced reload time now. That was the main downside of that gun, so I'm enjoying the AEK a lot more now. The bipods have gotten an accuracy buff, which is great. Again, I use the PKP a lot, so bipod on that all day, a lot of fun. The Rex has had its fire rate increased substantially, at least that's what I've found. And the Rex was already a pistol that I use a lot of the time, so now it's even more powerful, and I am really, really enjoying the buff that they gave to the Rex. That's probably all of the major things regarding the guns that I enjoy in the latest patch. There have been a couple other things, like allied SOFLAMs can no longer lock onto their own vehicles, and that was a problem beforehand. Some smaller things regarding reviving glitches, like the start menu popping up whenever you get revived, that's been fixed, and a few smaller glitches, like the out-of-map glitch on close quarters, which many of you have probably experienced, have been addressed. Now, some of the things that I do not like about the patch, the most major thing, and this is probably going to take up the rest of this video to discuss, that I do not like, is the change that they made to helicopters and stingers. Stingers now can target you, and Iglas for that matter, can target you up to 400 meters, which is much farther than they could before the patch. They also now ignore below radar on all vehicles, so you can no longer fly low to the ground to avoid being targeted by an infantry with an Igla or a Stinger. This has made them basically the go-to weapon for the entire enemy team whenever anyone is doing well in an air vehicle. It has made it very difficult to be effective in helicopters. It has made it very difficult to be near areas of the map where there's a lot of stuff going on, because there's probably at least one enemy there with an Igla or a Stinger that's going to be pointing at you, and there's very little you can do about it. Especially because, now here's what they did to helicopters. Gunners no longer have the option to use flares in attack helicopters. This means that all attack helicopters now only have one countermeasure that they can use. Some might argue that them having two before was slightly overpowered, because you could launch one right after the other and essentially deflect anything coming at you. But now, since you only have one, and Stinger's and Igla's range is increased so much, if you get locked on once and you get fired at, you can deflect the first missile, but it's almost impossible to fly out of range of a Stinger or Igla now before they lock on and fire at you again. And now you can no longer fly below radar to deflect that either, so you're essentially completely screwed if you get fired at consecutively now that gunners don't have flares. I have found this I really don't understand why DICE did this. I thought that helicopters were perfectly balanced. I thought that the fact that Stingers disabled you in one hit if they hit you was reason enough to keep them as they were, and I thought that having below radar as an option on helicopters to use for defending yourself against missiles was a nice thing to have. Also, in implementing these changes to below radar, they have introduced a glitch where helicopters' heat seekers also ignore below radar. If you look at the patch notes, this was not an intended change. This is just a glitch that has come along with the patch. What a surprise. I don't think anyone really expected the patch to be glitchless, as none of the others have, but even against other helicopters now, it's become a lot less fun to fly, because helicopter dogfighting has come down essentially to whoever fires first wins, since there's only one countermeasure to use per helicopter now. Overall, I just think that this change has made the game a lot less skill-based when it comes to air combat. It's made it a lot less fun to fly helicopters. It's made it a lot easier as an infantry to shoot down helicopters, much easier than I think it should be. And I think that DICE should change this back in the next patch, or I mean, preferably sooner, but we know that that's probably not going to happen, because right now it's just not very fun to fly helicopters, and I think that it's taken away a major part, and a very significant and well-known part of the Battlefield franchise, that is helicopter flying, and it's made it so much less enjoyable and so much less skill-based than it was before. It's really a shame to see that that's happened. That's really the most major thing, the most major problem that I have with this patch, although there are a couple other changes that I don't really understand why they made. For example, they reduced the fire rate on the 44 Magnum, and I don't really understand why they chose to do that, because it already fired fairly slowly. and it was already balanced out with the Rex in the fact that it did 65 damage as opposed to 50 damage per max damage body shot, and it fired slower than the Rex, but obviously it could kill faster. Now I think that the Rex is definitely preferable to the Magnum in almost every situation, and the Magnum no longer has its niche as sort of a very, very hard-hitting weapon that some skilled players could do really well with. I think that it still maintains the hard-hitting skilled players can do really well with it aspects fairly well, but now it seems like it's unnecessarily hard to use. It didn't need the nerf. I think it was one of the lesser used handguns among the general population of Battlefield 3, and I don't think that it was really necessary. So that's about it for this video. I'm ending here with some footage from the gunship attacking on Rush, and you can see right here just how powerful the gunship is when attacking. This was a nearly empty game. It was at the end of my nightly play session when I filmed this, so there weren't even very many people on this server, but you can still see how many kills I got with the gunship. Just give you an idea of exactly how powerful this thing can be when attacking on Rush. Anyway, that's it for me, everybody. Overall, I do recommend Armored Kill, as surprising as that might sound, simply because Conquest can be a ton of fun if you know what you're doing with it. Avoid Rush, avoid tank superiority also, which is something that I didn't really get to talk about, and I might make a separate video for that, because it is a very unique game mode. But stick to Conquest, and I think you'll at least have a pretty good time as long as you can stand running between flags with not much to do for long periods of time. So, thanks for watching. Rate this video up, rate this video down, use honest feedback. I always encourage that. Comment, subscribe if you like that, and I'll see you next time.